The Portland State University Oral History Project focuses on Oregon's land use planning program. It provides the opportunity for key participants to recount stories and anecdotes regarding how this unique program was developed, implemented, and evolved over its more than 4 decades in existence. It's April 26, 2017. My name is Michael Rupp. I'm a former member of the Department of Land Conservation and Development, and before that, a staff member with the Douglas County Planning Department. Also here is my former colleague at the Department of Land Conservation and Development, Jim Knight. With us today is Gordon Fultz, former Association of Oregon Counties Legislative Director. Welcome and thanks for agreeing to be interviewed.
Good to be here.
Could you give us a brief personal background about your settlement and life in Oregon?
Sure. I came from California, having been a legislative intern and then later working for the California Chamber of Commerce, doing some work in the field on campuses, as well as doing some managing of chambers of commerce. And I moved to Oregon in 1972 to become, basically at that time it was just an employee lobbyist for the Association of Oregon Counties, later becoming legislative director of that agency, of that group. In 1972, I came as a member of a 3-person staff who were, plus a couple of administrative staff. One handled the administrative responsibilities of 36 counties of Oregon, and the other one handled the transportation area. So every other area of interest, and there were many, economic development, public health, mental health, you name it, were under my responsibility. And so anything new that came on the horizon, I was responsible for. So that was my background. I basically, training wise, I had come with a psychology background, a business background, and then lots of legislative experience, including an internship in California at the legislature. So that's
how you got started.
That's how I got started. So
What brought you to Oregon?
That's a good question. Thank you, Jim. The reason, what brought me to Oregon was the wife that insisted that I move out of the San Francisco Bay Area. And so we came up here basically to find a better place for our daughter to be raised, and settled in Salem, since that was primarily the area where I could get that kind of a job that had my kind of background.
Uh-huh. Okay, so give us your professional background. How did that lend itself to moving to Oregon?
Well, my professional background, again, I had Master's Plus in 2 fields, in both business and in psychology.
Okay.
And because I was a student body president at a university in California, I'd gotten led into the political field, and I kind of enjoyed that more than the other 2 at the time. And so I went into basically looking into working in the legislature and in Congress in California. And then with the pressures of my wife and daughter to move here, I moved into the position of the Association of Oregon Counties, basically looking to be responsible for doing lobbying and also to assist the counties in their progress, working with the legislature, working with Congress, working with their constituents. So basically my role was undefined when I arrived, and ultimately became defined as I found places to basically get involved in things.
So was the 1973 session your first session?
That was my first legislative session. In 1972, when I came, I worked on all kinds of issues: solid waste, human resources, human services, and economic development. All of those, including reading about Senate Bill 10, which had been passed in the previous session, dealing with land use, the beginning of land use. And so I was basically just trying to catch up, and find out what issues might be in the 73 session. So that was my very first legislative session. And when there was discussion by the governor, and I'd formed a friendship during the interim with L.B. Day, and so when the legislature took up the subject of Senate Bill 100, I was the one who was assigned to basically follow that particular bill and the development of it. And as you might have imagined, seems like there was 60 or 70 different interests that were involved, wanting to be involved in the development of that bill. And then L.B. Day was appointed to be kind of the head of figuring out who was going to be involved in it. He was appointed by Halleck, and McCall actually was involved in that, as well as McPherson, as you all know. And so I remember a meeting that was held down in room 50, if you all remember, down the old Capitol building. Room 50 was the big one downstairs. Yeah. And there probably were 150 people in the room, and L.B. Day was there to pick who was going to be on the committee to work on this bill, because obviously the first draft of the bill had not gone very far. It was very much opposed by a lot of people. So it turns out that L.B. picked Ward Armstrong with Forest Industries, well, actually AOI at the time, Fred Benatti with Home Builders, and then it was a question of who they picked from the local government, and they decided to do me, since I'd known him, and they wanted, LB had a particular interest in counties being majorly involved because they had elected officials. The debate was over whether counties or COGS should be the ones, and of course the cities were very upset. They wanted to be represented, but in terms of people who represented all the people in the state besides the legislature, county commissioners were the people who were called on. So I got to be part of this little committee with LB to draft a version of Senate Bill 100 that would pass the legislature, given that the first draft had not. And then Hal Bronner was assigned to become basically the drafter for us. We had meetings 7 o'clock in the morning, which for me, who is not a morning person, was absolutely terrible.
Yeah.
It took several cups of coffee to finally come awake and get involved in those. But that was LB's hours, and he liked to meet at the coffee shop or special meeting rooms. We met oftentimes in the Senate wing and these little hidden alcoves to have our meetings, and we developed what was the version that passed as Senate Bill 100. And quite frankly, I'm very proud of the work that we all did, because it was a compromise all the way through.
Sure.
And so yeah, that was a big deal for counties. I had to go back after the passage of the bill, and during the process of that, myself and Ed Sullivan, who I probably have on your reviews, basically had to try to sell this to the 116 county commissioners at the time.
Yeah.
Which was not an easy sell. But the idea was that the bill was to balance conservation and development. That was the whole premise of it, and that they would have some responsibility to help make sure that balance was achieved. So, and we did. We sold it. The Association of Oregon Counties supported the bill fully at that time, and so we were right there as part of the system.
Can you summarize some of the balance points between those opposed and those supporting in terms of the counties?
Yeah, I'm
just
glad
in general.
No, that's very good. The balance point that I think sold our people was one, the rural interests seemed to understand clearly the need, and some of the urban interests, the need to preserve prime farm and forest lands. They got it. The people who perhaps were in counties that wanted to divide and sell and basically represented people who wanted to do that, they were not so sure. But the selling point, or one of the major selling points, was that, listen, your citizens are going to get a chance to be involved in this, and they're going to be able to help your planning commission and you as county commissioners balance out where you're going to have development, where you're going to do the preservation. That was one of the keys, and that you as a county board of commissioners would then be able to ratify whatever it was that you needed to do. And quite frankly, well, we're going beyond the passage of the bill now, but later as the goals were developed, the goals to us, and L.B. Day was in charge of the agency at the time, so he had followed through from being the person who had the committee that ultimately developed the bill to now being the administrator or the director of the agency. He was
chair of the commission.
And chair of the commission, I'm sorry, that's right.
Well, I just wanted to so we're clear on
And
that.
Kogan was
Yeah.
was the director. But LB was, make no doubt about it, LB was in charge.
Oh, yeah.
And LB wanted to make sure that everything was carried through as it was conceived by the group that actually had written Senate Bill 100. And so the development of the goals, as we looked at it, as we, the counties looked at it, was indeed a balance. We saw, especially the citizen involvement goal, looking at the rest of them. The rest of them were fine. The citizen involvement goal was one of the keys for us in terms of selling points. Because if the citizens were able to help basically decide how their county was going to be
Planned and zoned.
planned
Yeah.
and zoned, then obviously there would be, it would be they would own the direction. And so that was a selling point to the Association of Oregon Counties. Interestingly enough, at the time that this was all happening, right after the passage of the bill and into the development of the goals, I was appointed as the chair of the Marion County Planning Commission.
Oh,
Marion County felt it was important that I understand it from the ground level. So,
Yeah.
I wasn't initially a chair. I was on the Planning Commission and then up chair, and then Randy.
Frankie?
The
The director of.
director of planning, I can't
Yeah.
think of his last name, but he was planning director at the time. He later built the building down here, and the rest of the story
Yeah.
there. But anyway, serving in the planning commission, we were implementing at that time the beginning of the goals and the development of our plan to submit for approval. The problem in that, as we dealt with that, one of the assurances we tried to give to the people was that the citizen involvement was indeed going to work. So we were going to figure out the areas that need to be preserved, and the areas that need to be basically allowed to be developed. Well, anyway, we did that to the best of our ability, but a lot of things then, after we sold it that way, and before I forget it, I do want to bring one other item. LB was insistent before his death that there be urban growth boundaries around unincorporated communities. It's something that never really got done, and it's something that I always had wished had been done, because otherwise they were left without. And of course, the cities would have probably opposed that. They wanted to see that everything could come in. But there was lots of side issues along the way here, but one of which is when counties were determined to be the responsible party at the local level. Neil Goldsmith paid me a personal visit. He was mayor of Portland. In my office, and if you remember, our office is across the street from yours.
Can't forget that.
They were just cubicles, wide open.
Yeah.
And we had a very religious staff, for the most part. Not all of us, but most of the others were. Well, Neil Goldsmith came in, and at the top of his lungs, using every possible terrible word, just was chewing on why, he couldn't be, his city couldn't be the 37th county. That's what he wanted. And ultimately, you realize that something did happen to let that occur. But boy, he was really hot about that. And I'll just never forget that particular moment.
Yeah, I'm sure.
But then later, so everything seemed to be going according to plan. Everybody was okay until we started getting, and you remember this discussion as well as I do, court cases primarily that indicated that some goals seemed to have more favor and more power than others did. And citizen involvement, although there were citizen involvement committees everywhere, really went by the wayside. What the citizens might have wanted did not mean as much as preserving this land and this land and this land. And therein lied one of the problems with our members, is that they thought they were going to be able to have some discretion when in reality it turned out that they didn't have a lot of discretion. Not from your agency so much as the court cases that were, and I applaud Thousand Friends for bringing many of those court cases for what they were trying to do.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, and then as you know, because of the court cases and because it went so extreme one way without that citizen involvement, at least twice now, the legislature had to go back and open a window up for people who were deprived of property rights.
Right.
And gave them another window of opportunity, of which I hope we're past that now. But if, in my mind, if we had allowed the citizens to have a little bit more say, we might have avoided those 2 or 3, and perhaps some of the recall measures that were put forth, because our membership went crazy. In fact, one time I remember this, on about a 13-12 vote in our legislative committee, they voted to favor one of the recalls. This was after they'd been so supportive of the original bill. And then we went through all the other iterations.
I can give you a story here. Back in 1985, I came to the department in 1982 after working 10 years in Douglas County. And I had talked to Jim Ross, our director at the time, and we were actually supporting a lot of record bill. Thousand Friends, the earlier session, had prepared a bill that passed, but it really didn't do anything. And I was talking to Keith and some of the other planning folks that I knew, and they were saying this bill doesn't solve the problem. And so we went to a legislative committee. LB was there, and I remember Eldon Hout and I were talking about a lot of record that we thought probably would work, and Jim was supportive of it. Counties were generally supportive of it. Keith came up after we spoke and started talking, and LB said, I thought we'd solved this last session, and he just turned around and that was the end of the discussion. And we never got that lot of record bill that I thought would have been a little more of a safety valve. I'm guessing if that had passed, that we may not have seen some of the ballot measures or some of the issues.
Couldn't agree more.
Yeah.
That and the marginal lands bill that we tried to get resolved on, which was another attempt to do a little bit of what
secondary
you said.
lands, marginal lands,
Yeah.
those are all issues that we had wrestled with in the department even.
Yeah.
We
Right.
saw some of this from our side too, but we had that legal obligation to follow, court decisions and
Yeah.
commission precedents, and so we were seeing a lot of the same things, but there wasn't a way to
Yeah.
efficiently move from point A to B.
No, well, and we were caught in the same dilemma. I mean, truly, we had in our organization a group called OClock. I don't know if you remember this. It was the Oregon Coalition Against Land Use, something like that. Anyway, it was basically an Eastern Oregon organization. Harold Haugen, you probably remember.
Yeah, I know Harold from-
was involved in this group, and they were, anything that
Southern Oregon folks
AOC
were-
proposed, they opposed, and so we had this internal strife for years.
And these are all county commissioners
These
also.
were all county
Yeah.
commissioners, one against the other. It was usually the urban
Yeah.
and some of the real rural areas against some of these others who wanted to they didn't like the bill.
Yeah.
But we fought, and it was strange. It'd be one day I'd go to the legislature and I'd be in favor of something, and then a legislative committee would take another position a few days later, our legislative committee, and it would change.
Yeah.
We faced each other in the same hearings. It was just a mess in our organization.
Yeah.
Ultimately.
Well, that puts you in an awkward.
Oh, it was terrible.
Yeah.
I was always, and when the Democrats controlled the legislature, because we were in a position of trying to straighten this out, we were the only group that was there. The group that's there now, the anti-land use group, I'm trying to think of the name.
Oregonians in Action.
Oregonians in Action was not around, so
Boy,
Yeah.
we were the ones who were basically trying to straighten it out, and the Democrats sort of took aim at us because they were very much in favor of the bill, and I understand that, but they took aim at me and Tom Troop and others, and I recall some very vicious hearings, but But, their job was to try to knock me down so that they,
Right.
could look better. But Oregonians in Action came to balance out, and Lord knows what happened after that, because it wasn't too long before I left. And then when Art Slack took my position, basically in our organization to follow land use, he got it easy. He didn't have to go through all those words, because our county commissioners at that time had basically the new iteration of county commissioners had come into office understanding where we were in land
Yeah.
use. But it was the ones who were there when we initially sold it, and then
And
things
through the
went
acknowledgement
awry from
process where all the battles were,
Right.
Yeah.
From the court cases, it changed.
Yeah.
But I, to this day, believe in what we did. In fact, we've had county commissioners, when I was last in the legislature, they were coming forth saying, looking at Senate Bill 100, saying, this is the bill we need to have. Well, it's the bill we did have.
Yeah.
But they wanted to pass it again, just as it was written, because it was written as a big balance.
Mhm.
And it was really a very good piece of legislation.
do you feel the commission, and I know LB was the chair of the commission at the time when they actually drafted the goals, do you think there was,
Yes.
the goals reflected the statute pretty well?
I felt very good about the goals initially, until we started getting a disproportionate value of them through the courts.
And what, obviously goals three and
Three and four.
4 were,
3 and 4 were the big ones.
Right.
Yeah, and I was looking through the goals, and 1, 3, and 4 were certainly the ones that I felt the strongest about, because they were the ones that were. I'm glad we had Goal 9, which was economic development. I'm glad we had the public facilities and services. Just a sidelight story on that, if I can.
Sure.
When Senate Bill 100 passed, another bill passed, which number I'm trying to remember, 437 or 473. It was the McPherson bill, Senator McPherson bill, that was designed to prevent parcels of land being sold without access to sewer and water. And it came about because of an incident up in Deschutes County with the Deschutes County Water District of some kind that had sold all these parcels basically without ability to have any water. So
Yeah.
they were basically parcels that could not be developed, and landowners were very upset, and we, the counties, were very in favor of this particular bill. And so it was a very important piece of legislation for us. But an interesting incident that occurred during that time was that in the halls of the Capitol, as that bill was being discussed over on the House side, I had these two guys from this particular water district that were involved in this, in the sale of these kind of parcels, actually take me over in the corner, if you know the corner of the Capitol around where the Democrats caucused, and pull a gun out and say,
Really?
we're serious about this bill not passing. I just want you to know that. Now, they didn't point it at me.
Yeah.
They just pulled it out and showed it to me. And I thought to myself, wow, things are getting a little serious here. I mean, I wasn't laughing. It was a very serious matter. I reported it. They were gone by the time.
Yeah.
But at that time, you could apparently carry anything into the Capitol, and it was okay. But I remember that incident. But that bill was significant, and I know it passed. And as we talked, Mike, somewhere down the road, I know the home builders, there's a piece of that they might have liked. But I think we got by with the legislation that said you just can't sell something that doesn't have access to water.
And when you say sewer and water, do you mean septic and
Septic.
well water even?
Yeah.
Okay.
It was primarily well water, and this,
Yeah.
it was interesting that this water company, which had no water, was selling the parcels.
Yeah.
Kind of on, hopes that maybe they'd find
Speculation
water.
that, yeah.
But,
Yeah. In fact, at that time, early on in '73, when I was in Douglas County, we had the buyer beware issue, and before the Planning Commission, and we had that debate also. Should you be allowed to divide and sell property when you didn't know whether you could get a septic or water?
Yeah.
And I think our commission was split. Some of them felt like, well, no, you shouldn't be able to do that. That's our job, is to be sure that if we allow people to divide their land, they ought to know or guarantee that somebody buying it, can get sewer and water on the property.
And that was at a time that Californians and others were coming here and wanting Oregon
Yeah.
property.
Yeah,
And they had no idea what they were getting.
exactly.
So,
But anyway, I just wanted to mention
Yeah,
that.
part of that actually led to Senate Bill 100 because Governor McCall used that as one of the rallying points was
Yeah.
those subdivisions out in Christmas Valley and places.
Exactly. That and development along the coast. It was basically and people trying to claim coastal lands and
Yeah.
it was a mess.
Subdividing sheer cliffs and things like that. So.
Yeah, there was lots of things. I mean, it was at the and one of the questions that you had in here. I don't know if you can skip around on.
Yeah,
it.
go ahead. Yeah, we can.
But to whether or not what the reasons were for the passage, I think that the politics, those kinds of horror stories, along with a legislature at the time that was really not as partisan as we have today. In fact, not nearly as partisan as it was because when they met, they were concerned about Oregon problems. Once in a while, there'd be one that wanted to deal with a problem in Josephine County or in this other county, but for the most part, they were looking at solving problems that Oregon had. They were doing what I thought, and I believed, where I came from, the same thing, California. I believed that legislatures and Congress were there to solve the problems of the people.
Right.
And they did that. And fortunately, we had an L.B. Day, we had a Ted Halleck, we had a Hector McPherson, who really were, and there's some other players in there as well, George Wingard, of both parties that came together and with those kind of incidents occurring, with the intent to work together to solve them. And the question that you ask is, could it happen today? I don't think so.
Yeah, the climate's so different than it
The
was.
climate is so partisan
Yeah.
now, I don't think it could happen unless one party just controlled everything, and you might be fine, and which is, I think, the case. But generally speaking, the timing was right, the circumstances were right, and all of the players. And this was a newer issue, and it came about kind of like the bottle bill, and people got behind it and rallied behind it. So.
Well, Jim has an issue, or not an issue, but when the commission adopted Governor McCall and Straub.
remember that last hearing was December 27th, 2 days before Christmas. I'm not saying it was all full of Christmas spirit in the room, but we had leading off outgoing Governor McCall, because his term was up in a few days.
Mm-hmm.
Incoming Governor Straub. He was going to swear in a few days. Side by side, Republican, Democrat. But shoulder to shoulder, urging the commission to move forward and adopt the commission, the goals, the 14 goals. And to me, and maybe I'm sure others in the room, were moved by that. That they have those two leaders of Oregon's politics, if you will, say, LCDC, do this.
Yeah.
And they did.
Yeah.
And
No,
I just thought that was a pretty, because we had most of the players that really were involved with this were in the room at the same time.
Yeah.
So to be witness to that was another, I think, important step. To see
Yeah.
that kind of coming together. And you're right, today we don't have that kind of working together.
Yeah.
Doesn't seem so. Maybe Oregon's better than some other places in the union right now. But,
Well,
it
yeah.
just was something else. I'm curious, so on another point, were you in the League of Cities, basically shoulder to shoulder on most of the issues? Or
No.
And you haven't talked about that, but I'm just curious when, say, Goal 14, which was probably the most pointed goal that would involve cities and counties having to work together, because the goal required that the boundary for a city had to be adopted by both city and county. And whether or not you felt, or the league felt, or both of you felt that was not right, or more should be done, I'm just curious, what were your methods of getting together and trying to present where you could a united front? Or didn't you do that very much?
Yeah, well...
That's a lot of questions, I'm
no,
sorry.
I think that the league, ultimately, in the beginning, they didn't like the fact that okay, well, I just wanted to finish up on urban growth boundary issue for just a second. Again, still being with Marion County Planning Commission during this time, we were debating if this is going to be the boundary for the city of Salem for, I think we were looking at 20 years at that time. Why aren't we, as we put in water lines, sewer lines, and all of that infrastructure, why aren't we requiring developers and whatever to be part of putting in enough infrastructure to basically provide for what was necessary? And we were getting a lot of feedback from the cities. We don't have the money. And I understand, they don't have the money for this, we can't do this, we have to stay here. And of course, as a result of that, then, you know, the boundaries in many areas kept going out and out and out and out, and nobody ever developed that necessary infrastructure internally to allow the containment of the development within the limits. And again, another reason why I argued and LBD agreed that we should have something around the unincorporated areas that basically allowed them to exist, but that was opposed vigorously by the cities. So that's really all I had on that. If you want to go to the guidelines, we had looked at the guidelines as kind of the optional directions, the flexible directions that we would follow in terms of implementing the goals. And again, the court cases sort of took the flexibility of those guidelines out. So as the court cases kept eating away at that,
Yeah.
it caused our members problems. And again, that was an iteration of county commissioners that came, that we had sold this package, but it turned out to be this package because of some changes that occurred along the way. The new iteration of commissioners, at least when I left a few years ago, seemed to be
Accepting of
pretty
the
accepting of where
program.
we were and what was
Yeah.
going on, what their role was. And so,
And of course, the program evolved to the point where unincorporated communities actually have flexibility. I know Greene, the area in Douglas County, you know, is run by the county, but it's basically an urban area. White City and Medford, Pacific City, not a city, but the
Yeah.
Tillamook County basically runs it as an urban area. So
Yeah.
we got there. It just took us.
it just took a while to get there.
It did.
Yeah.
Yeah.
A couple other interesting points that I'll just bring up here I wanted to mention. One was McCall, his speechwriter lived with me at the time, Gene Maudlin, and so we'd get calls regularly, either me on land use or he for speech writing on this topic. And I can't tell you what a great man he was. I mean, he and LB and Halleck, McPherson, they were just, they were stand-up people I really respected. And I can't say that about lots of later legislators that I had. One of the other guys that probably isn't mentioned much, but the bill passed the Senate pretty handily, and with all the people I just mentioned basically having a role in that. But when it went to the House, the guy who carried the bill, one of the guys who carried the major part of the bill was a guy named Ralph Groner, who you may remember. And I wrote the speech for Ralph as to how to pass the bill on the House floor, his speech. And he did very well with it, and of course
He was out of Milwaukee because I used to live in Milwaukee. So.
I think he still works over in the legislature.
Oh, is that right?
Still writing.
Wow.
Anyway, that was, and then the other interesting two pieces that I just wanted to mention. Thousand Friends of Oregon, which had been, we'd battled like this for a while. But ultimately, where I lived, where at the time I was out later than the Gene Maudlin roommate situation, was out in an area in Turner. And right across from me was this beautiful agricultural land, probably, I don't know, 300 or 400 acres. And one of the prominent Salem businessmen, who probably I shouldn't mention, had basically wanted to, and I was at this time off the Planning Commission, wanted to come over and create Hawaiian Acres. I'll never forget the name of it, right across the street from me. And it was going to be these little 5-acre parcels. And this was during the time that there was still some question whether it could or could not be done. And Marion County felt they had some responsibility here. So I remember Henry and I teamed up, and went before the Marion County Planning Commission to basically say, no, this is not what was intended in Senate Bill 100. And it wasn't. This is right out in prime agricultural land.
Did you feel that the agency here was on your side in those kind of debates?
Absolutely.
So in terms of perception, we were saying no to such things that you were just describing. Right?
Yeah.
In terms of review of their plans and discussions and what have you.
Yes.
Well-
I always felt good that you were there for that kind of thing. Where I felt the agency perhaps let us down, but you didn't have any choice, was on the citizen involvement goal. We had a little committee, remember, what was it called? LOAC? Local
Agency, yeah.
Was the advisory committee
to your agency.
to the agency.
And
the commission.
Ellen
Lowe? No.
Lowe,
Yeah,
former
Ellen Lowe,
mayor
okay.
of Salem, was on there, and then later some other people. But
Sure.
that committee pretty much always said, I mean, their regular comments were, we want to have the citizens have more say. And I think you agreed with us, but you couldn't very much.
What did that mean to you?
It meant that if the citizens felt that an area should have a development or could have a development, then it ought to be included. And some counties tried to basically take the citizens' comments about where those areas were and bring them forth. This is around my recollection, and they were refused at your level, possibly because of a court case, possibly because of whatever. And so there was always a feeling from the county side that on that particular goal, it wasn't being enforced as much as we wanted to see it. I don't know what the restrictions were from your end. I tried to understand, but at that time L.B. Day was gone, or I would have gone to him, and others came in. But yeah, that's the only issue where I felt that I wanted the agency to do more for our members, and I think the cities felt the same way. Other than that, everything else went fine. The only other story I was going to say is that there was an agreement that Bob Stacy, who was also with Thousand Friends, and I had made about how we were going to proceed in the legislature on a piece of legislation to kind of ease the situation for counties and flexibility in the system. And he committed that was a good idea to do that at the time. And then came a hearing when we had legislators that really didn't want to give us that kind of flexibility. And to his credit, Bob Stacy came and basically testified in favor of our favor, and the bill passed the way it was supposed to pass. And to this day, I credit the people we were working with in your agency, our opponents, legislators, people had different views. They were pretty much stand-up people, and people who I consider I respected, I still respect.
Whether you agreed with the position, you at least
They
knew.
didn't agree with, but I really loved the people.
Yeah, if they made a deal, you could count on it. I mean,
Yeah,
they would-
and that's, I just wanted to say that because those were people that I cared about, and I would still be working today maybe if I could physically and mentally do it, if there were people like that in our legislature and in our agencies.
Yeah.
But it's changed. So anyway, that's I wanted to get those pieces in. I was trying to think of what else here was significant, or perhaps questions that you had about where we were. There was a question about what I would do now.
Yeah,
And
what
so
would-
let me.
What you do differently if you had the chance?
Well, not now, not that I would have done then, because I didn't know better then.
Yeah.
But now that I've had a few years to think about it, something that I would think should be considered, when you put property in agriculture and timber, for the most part, I know that there are areas and you have a goal, and you know what, I don't know the details of it anymore, probably did at the time. It has to do with, where is it, air, water, and
Goal
land
6.
resources
Goal
quality.
6.
I probably would have added to that goal some public health concerns because of what's being used in agricultural and other lands that are timberlands. There are, as you well know, there are chemicals, there are practices being used in those areas that are really harmful to our environment. And I don't know, that's a DEQ issue, but to me it's also potentially a land use issue. They passed the right to farm law not too long after this, which meant that they could do anything they wanted to in farmland. And no matter who lived there, you would bear the consequences of that. I don't know what agency or how, but to me that public health and the concern to make sure that our land use planning coincides with good public health, to me, go together. And so that's just one thing that I would see that the agency might want to either work with other agencies on or consider.
I know part of the program or the way that we dealt with similar issues was we were trying to do buffers and, you know, large gaps, if you will. I remember working with BLM and forestry folks about making sure that BLM was real concerned, and forestry was too, about separations of development and the evolution of Goal 4, for example. They established the template test, and now there are buffers between them and active forest active forest land activities, if you will. So I'm not sure that covered it in the way that you were liking it to, but I think there was an attempt to try to make sure that agriculture and forest land had some degree of separation between areas that were, developed and where people were living versus activities going on.
Yeah, and I understand that. I think that's a good start. For instance, I was a beekeeper for about 15 years. I live out in the country, and I have what's called a wildlife habitat, which I really appreciate that zone being approved by the legislature. And in that wildlife habitat, I had bees, and basically around me are hazelnuts, grass seed, and a number of other things. And I can tell you this firsthand that the spraying of that has killed every my bees won't last more than a year. I don't do it anymore. And every one of those that wants to have anything, particularly the hazelnuts, for instance, that need, and other crops that need the bees, they have to import the bees for the season because everything has been killed off that was local. So I just think that if you're going to have those zones, that there ought to be some public health concern, let alone who knows what it's doing to the rest of us who live there.
Sure.
That just a thought.
Yeah, I wonder if it sounds like a Department of Agriculture question.
Well,
And the
yeah.
health division too.
Yeah.
State health division.
Yeah, and part of this is because I worked for, along with land use, I was a lobbyist for public health,
Right.
mental health, and we saw this stuff, and so that's one thing that I would certainly consider. I also would consider, I guess, doing something with these urban growth boundaries in a way that does indeed allow, I mean, if we keep growing, it's just going to move, the boundaries keep moving. And I saw it in Metro, and obviously I saw, I hate to mention politics here, but in the political situation, again, a very smart governor, who's no longer governor, but certainly pro-land use governor, and some others were able to co-opt on occasion one or two of our counties to come in against our association. And, I'm trying to be careful here, but basically one of them had probably the best farmland in the valley, one of those counties. And it turns out that what happened is that the eyes were closed when that county decided to move its urban growth boundary out into the prime farmlands. Whereas all the rest of the counties were,
We're confined to the...
yeah.
Yeah.
And I know what the deals were made. I watched them being made, and it really upset us to see this kind of a political situation where there was an intent to, it was kind of, well, I want to say it's parallel to what has happened, or at least is being purported to have happened in the election. It was somebody foreign coming in from the outside and causing, an internal strife between our own organization, but favoring then one of the parties in exchange. That kind of politics is just lousy.
Where was DLCD in those discussions?
DLCD, good question. I came to you, I remember coming to you asking what was happening. I think you were compromised, quite frankly.
We compromised?
I think you were compromised. Not the staff, but the commission on the issue.
We went to the commission?
Yeah, I think some of these went to the commission.
Is this recent or a long time?
No, it's a long time ago.
Was it part of the acknowledgement of the county's plan?
No, it was after acknowledgement. It had to do with basically it was, I think the chair of the commission was Bill Blosser.
Sure, pretty good guy.
Yeah, he was. But he was in the area to be affected, close to it. It was Washington County. And the deal there with, I can't remember his name, he was the car dealer, the chair. And Rick
Justice?
was the planner.
Oh.
You remember
I
them.
don't know.
Anyway, they were,
Well, Brent, I remember Brent Curtis. being-
no, this was before Brent. He was a good guy.
Rick.
Anyway.
Oh, what's his name?
Anyway, basically, it was that county and the other county opposed AOC, so we had internal division, which is what the governor and others had wanted. But then that county also got some special treatment for what they had wanted. So that was the issue, and it did come to you guys. And somehow, magically, that plan appeared to be a little different than all the other plans. And that was just, we watched it, and they were able to expand into, and they have, and ultimately, they got stuff developed on some pretty nice lands.
Now, what we have today, of course, is a regional boundary up there.
Yeah. Well, then
That came later.
That came later. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
that's
that
what
was-
Metro's role is to manage that, multi-jurisdictional boundary.
Yeah. Well, it is now.
It is now.
Yeah, it is now. It wasn't at the time. Yeah. It just, so those kind of politics, I guess again, having dealt with such wonderful people and then seeing this kind of stuff kind of bothered us.
10 years was a wonderful time
It was. It was.
of acknowledgement.
it-
We only had 36 counties and 242 cities to deal with, so.
Well, and you
Not
guys,
that they were all the same, no, I'm not saying that.
you guys did a heck of a job. We were, we looked across at you all the time. Our building was right across the street, but
You threw a few snowballs once in a while.
yeah, we'd fight now and then. We fought at the hearings now and then over this and that and the other. But for the most part, I think everything. I like what we did, and I like, and I think your hands were tied when it came to that citizen involvement piece that ultimately caused us to have a little problem. And there, of all the issues that I'm aware of in the 40 years I spent with AOC, no issue has recalled more commissioners than this issue, land use. And it was simply because their people had wanted one thing and thought they were going to get it, the ability to have some say in how their land was dealt with, and the commissioner had no ability to give it to them.
Yeah.
And yet was told that they could. And so our commissioners were recalled.
Yeah.
So this became a really hot issue. And again, no fault of yours,
No.
just the fault of the court cases that came through.
Yeah, in fact, these interviews are revealing a lot of that, which is interesting, because in my time with Douglas County, I remember a lot of the hearings we held, and they weren't fun. Some of them were pretty contentious. And we'd kind of come to understand that this is the plan we think we can sell to Salem, and so we'd get everybody to basically calm down, agree, okay, we'd run it up here and it'd come back.
Yeah.
And after you come back once or twice, it's very hard to go out to the public and say, well, this is what we can get. And of course, a lot of people thought, well, you already said last time that
Yeah.
I was okay to do what I thought, we were gonna get in the
Yeah.
plan. And so,
Hey,
and then on top of that, it'd go in the 1,000 Friends, we had somewhere, we being the department here, when we worked here, we acknowledged it, commission acknowledged it, it got sent to the Supreme Court or Court of Appeals, and it got sent back. Not very often, but when it did, it was even worse. I mean, it was very hard.
Well, and that's kind of what they did,
Yeah.
and that was, that was Governor McCall coming back in saying, with Henry and saying, let's make sure this works. And again,
It's the process.
Yeah, it was the process. It just wasn't what I guess I look at to LB. I think if LB had still been around, he would have helped mitigate some of the
maybe.
issues that we dealt with. But
Mitigate's a nice word.
well, it wasn't.
You know who we're talking about. At
Yeah,
times.
I know, but I still think he was, remember LB, he was a good, when he believed in something, he's another guy that would call, this guy would call at 5 o'clock in the morning,
Yeah.
my house, and unfortunately, those were the days when you didn't have phones you could turn off, and he'd call, and he'd want to talk about something we were working on the bill. And then later, when he was the commission chair, how are you guys doing? He would ask questions, and why at that ungodly hour of the morning he would be calling, because again, I'm not a morning person, I don't know, but he'd do it late at night.
Yeah.
He was just always there, and he wanted to make sure this was put forth. So I give him a lot of credit for what he did.
What's unique about Oregon is that we have the state's interest, quote unquote, what the state's concerned about and responsible for. But unlike other states, the planning of those interests and dealing with those is done locally, cities and counties and people. And so trying to reconcile sometimes what was perceived here as the state's interest through the goals and what was perceived as the state's interest at the local level sometimes clashed. And that was hard to explain to people, because whether it's ag land or spraying and so forth, and of course some of those issues were not ours to deal with. That we would point at the, the EQ or whoever it was, to take care of some of those issues.
No, you put your finger on, that reminds me of another goal. You put your finger on one of the basic issues. And that give and take, the state's interest, local interest, in trying to work out who's in charge of what. That took a lot of work. I think, but your other
What
goal,
you did when the goals were adopted, when not you in terms of an elected official, but was, the Senate Bill 100, and then the goals that followed from that. That was the state's interest. Now, how do we see how those interests are protected or carried out or addressed? And getting consensus.
not easy.
At the local level, Mike, he was involved with many jurisdictions, and and here in Marion County, you had 20 cities, most cities of any county, I think, and so having to address those in terms that we could communicate and convey to people in a way that made sense. And part was education. I don't mean that in a negative, unfair way. I'm just saying that how do we explain things to you that you can understand and relate, and have your own communities deal with those. And saying all that doesn't make it easy.
No?
At all. But we had to do that time and time again, and of course, as Mike was saying, we would send people back. It's like going to the principal's office and being told this particular page is correct, the other pages are not. That's a bad example, but you know what I'm trying to say is that we would have to say go back and do it over or change.
And that was
tough. That was tough work.
And as Mike pointed out, we're going back to the county and trying to explain to your planning commission and to your people that, well, they've denied it. that give and take, it was, you know, and that, one of the reasons LOAC was created to kind of help that, but then it started out well, and then it kind of dissipated. I doubt if it even existed.
We had county commissioners, as you know, come to the meetings and represent their county's position, their views and so forth, and then we'd have people on one side, citizens, saying, we agree with him, and other people, interest groups and so forth, would say no. And not no, but, you know, disagree. And we had to sit in the middle and try to bring all that together and then say, this is what we believe the goals require. And the commission would vote on those. And sometimes they'd vote with us, and sometimes they would say, no, we're going to go with this particular position. It was amazing times.
The other goal, and I'm trying to, I think it was a goal, but you had the ability to rein in other agencies. Basically, you were in charge of coordinating other agencies on land use. And was that, I want to say that was a goal, or it was a power given to you by the legislature.
Yeah, state agency coordination.
Yeah, and one of the things we really wanted was you to do that. And I know you had uphill battles there, but I can tell you that we had to battle with other agencies in developing our plans.
Sure.
And wanted you to kind of rein them in to help us, and that was another issue.
We tried to, I think, at best times when we could, bring together local elected officials and planning staff, but also some of those agencies were also present in those discussions. And was it easy to bring some consensus there? No, it wasn't, because the other agencies would say, we have OAR, whatever it is, the rule, or, you know, statutory responsibility, and explaining that was hard.
Yeah.
And we tried the best we could, and sometimes people agreed with us, and other times they didn't.
And we worked on that legislation to make sure that these agencies would be involved, so you had the control over it. But again, when you didn't, it left us again in a terrible position of having an agency say, well, no, this is where the road's going to go, or whatever, and us saying, hey, well, it's going to be part of the plan. No, we don't have to work with you, and that's what happened.
Yeah.
And so anyway, yeah, lots of things, but yeah,
I think we got that eventually. It took a while to get the state agencies
well, yeah,
on board.
and I know I always, again, my predecessor or my successor, Art, was he got the easy job. Things had already been hassled out.
Yeah, the battles had already been waged.
Yeah, I kept telling him, you got the easy job. You don't have to go in front of the committees and get hammered about this and that and whatever. But
I'm sure he appreciated you smoothing the way for him.
yeah, it's interesting. Harold Halligan, the guy I told you who was part of that OClock,
Right.
again, was the guy who helped bring OClock back into our organization. So a lot of credit, goes to him. It
Yeah.
was Josephine County, and that
Yeah.
was a county that was always in
I
upheaval.
worked a lot down there, so
Yeah, you know that.
I know Bruce and
Bruce.
Harold
Yeah.
actually.
But yeah, it
We
was.
we did a regional problem-solving project. You might remember regional
I do
problem-solving.
remember that. I think it was a great idea.
And it is a great idea. The bad part was the legislature, for reasons I understand, got impatient that it took us 10 years to do it instead of 5. And Josephine County was a place where you had to bring the folks along or it wasn't going to happen.
Yeah.
And we got to a point where they had a regional problem-solving plan and they had a commissioner that attended practically every meeting. And I remember going down there to the meetings, and we'd get a whole new audience, or half the audience would be brand new every time you go down, and they'd have to start over. They have to say, why are we down here? What are we doing?
Yeah.
And the county commissioner that was there got defeated in the election. And so we literally they had to start all over again, bringing everybody up to speed. Why are we here? Negotiations with the city of Grants Pass and the area just north of Grants Pass, Merlin area was the area of contention. Basically, very interesting area because it was a mixture of rather intense urban and rural. and the water systems were up, the water came from the city, and they were upset that the industries were moving. Something I want to bring up with you is the discussion of your involvement in how LUBA, the Land Use Board of Appeals, got created. Maybe you can share that with us.
Just simply that at the time we were looking at a way to arbitrate some of the disputes that were ongoing between the state and the counties, and we thought, well, okay, how about having some kind of an independent group? Well, we thought it could be independent. Take a look at these and resolve them. And that was basically the initial thought we had, and debated for quite a while. And so therefore, out of that came some interest in, obviously, legislation that created it. And then there was a question of whether we really wanted to keep it, because it seemed to be going, it wasn't as arbitrary, and, it wasn't doing the mediation, perhaps, and trying to resolve it. Once again, I think it was impacted by a lot of court cases.
Yeah.
And that court case stuff was, that they couldn't mediate what was already in a higher level of law. And so that unfortunately didn't turn out as well as we had hoped, but that was the intent.
Well, it certainly is unique. I think it's the only one in the country that we have a land use court that's all they deal with is land use issues,
Yeah.
which is...
Well, that was the intent, and because we had the dispute, I don't know if is it still working? I mean, I don't know.
It still exists, of course.
What's that?
It still exists.
Still exists, yeah. But the idea was, trying to find that way to mediate.
Yeah.
At the time Senate Bill 100 was passed, we didn't have litigation
Right.
that forced us to go one way or the other. That was a new twist. It's something that I don't think anybody who passed that legislation anticipated. It came later, and again, to the credit of 1,000 Friends and others, they were trying to get things in their direction, and that was a very wise move on their part. One of the things that I want to go back for a moment to what I see it for the future, I think that right now, especially in this state, there's probably, I would hope that there are leaders that could be gathered together who would be, look at what do we need to do in light of what's happening in our world and in our United States, to look at what Oregon needs to do to preserve its value of life, again, I like to use the words that we've carefully chose, conservation and development. We want to conserve that which is important for resources and important for a lot of reasons. Historical monuments, all that seems to be on the chopping block right now. And yet we also want to be able to have people come to support our industries and whatever else we need, and you want them to have a place to live. So trying to balance that out, balance hasn't gone away, it will always be here.
Right.
And what I have experienced in this interesting, this one little bill, Senate Bill 100, I got to travel all over the United States to speak on this bill. And I basically supported it with the exception of two things. One, that if you're going to put a bill like that together, and I think that all those states that I spoke to had sprawling development that was disorganized and terrible, whereas we don't have that because of our system. Now we don't have that, we did, but the two things that I would suggest is that if you involve the citizens, make sure they're involved, one, and two, make sure that you don't find that you have court cases that show up that undo whatever it is you tried to do. Now, I don't know how you do that, but basically those are the two issues that kind of changed in the system from what we had designed, because they were looking into how they do a land use system, and I've not been able to have the time to go back, but I've traveled to all of the United States, and I'll tell you what, I'm most proud of what we have done here in preserving it, and I just think that there ought to be perhaps another iteration. I think, as I mentioned, I think you ought to throw health into the mix somehow, people's health, animal health, all that, because I just think that's one of the things we need to look at in our land. So we have a lifestyle value. That's one of the things we were trying to preserve in 1973, and I think it's still something we want to preserve in 2017 and beyond. And I hope that we have the courage and the leadership and the right players, if they're around, to do that.
Gordon, we have a populace today that doesn't have much of an idea of what we have and what we've accomplished and what lies the issues ahead of us. How do we, I don't like to use the word educate too much, but inform our citizens about what we have and what lies out there and how they can be involved and make some influence over some of the decisions? I mean, those are big issues. I don't have answers to those questions, but that's what I think about, is that here we are, 42 years later. We're going to cut this off, I suppose, here. But are we making progress in that regard, or is there something more that should be done? Those are hard questions. I don't have answers to those. But
No.
But here we are. We're 70 years old, plus or minus a little bit, and what lies out there ahead of us? Are the people here doing the right thing? Under their commission, and I don't know. We have to evaluate these things. And that's hard to say, harder to do.
I couldn't agree more. The one thing that I have noticed, and I would look, maybe you and I really have the same answer here, but just in the last few days, I have noticed a threat to all of the monuments and the reserve areas that the United States has patiently over time made, preserved and saved for the public being threatened. And what I've seen from that in just the last few days is that there's a huge public outcry against it. Mm-hmm. And you can see it all over the media and Facebook, and I'm not saying that's a way to get somebody's attention, but I don't even like to even suggest using that. But certainly when you start to threaten a way of life, people come to life. And maybe they don't understand that some of the values that they are living here for are at risk. And that may be a message that somebody ought to carry forth. And again, I'm an advocate. Bring the people from your agency, bring the 1,000 Friends of Oregon, bring the counties, bring the cities, bring them all back together. Find a couple of legislative leaders who are really well respected on both parties. Convene them and talk about this issue. And that's exactly kind of what happened at Senate Bill 10, and it continued with 100, and continued down that road. I mean, we all know that we've learned so many lessons about the struggle between local and state and all that stuff. But I think, for the most part, preserving the values of this state are still number one in most people's minds. So that'd be my suggestion.
Some of
Great.
McCall's words were tremendous back in his time, Governor McCall. In my interview with Mike, I read a couple of lines from some of McCall's speeches to the legislature. Pretty moving.
Yeah, Hector's as well. The one you
Hector
closed
as
with
well.
was really
Yeah.
impressive.
We had some tremendous champions back then.
Oh, absolutely.
And do we have those people today? And if not, where are they? And if we do have them, get them to come forward. And your idea of a massive convention.
Bring it back. Bring it all back
Yeah.
again, and then and
Maybe.
again, I think the convening of that is something that should occur from I point over there, because that's where it used to be, wherever the
Legislature is.
the legislature is, and the governor. I mean, again, I don't know whether the governor has the same, I don't think we've had a governor like McCall since, quite frankly.
Well,
But if we could find the champions you talk about, I absolutely agree. I'd love to see that. Yeah.
okay, I think we'll probably close here. Thank you very much. On behalf of Portland State University and those of us involved in the Oral History Project of Oregon's Land Use Planning Program, I'd like to thank you for allowing us to interview you.
It's been a pleasure, Mike, Jim.
Let's do it again. So.
It's great to see
We
you
might do
all
that.
again. Thank you very much.
Thank you.